So, okay, guys, I think, I mean, throughout your career, whether it's pre-training, during training, or even after training, delivering a presentation is part and parcel of part and parcel of what you have to do, as part of your duties. Whether it's teaching, whether it's performing day-to-day discussions, presenting your research output. And specifically for the purpose of presenting your research proposal, that's something that you can't run away from, right? So in this, in this presentation, we'll try and unpack what basically constitutes, the elements that lead to an effective presentation. I'm going to divide this presentation into two parts. One, a general overview on how you should plan your presentation, and what are the principles that that you should consider, right, to make your presentation that much more effective. And then we will we will train our focus on how you deliver an effective presentation in the context of presenting a research proposal, right? So is my slide moving?
No, now
right.
it is.
Okay, all right, great. So Mayer described 12 key principles when it comes that one should consider when one plans a multimedia learning opportunity, right? Now, though this is actually designed, or these pointers are actually put in place to guide the preparation of lessons and presenting, case-based discussions and stuff like that, I think it does have its application in the day-to-day presentations, right? So we will unpack and we'll slowly look at all the principles that may help, result in a slightly more effective presentation when we actually have to do one. All right. So let's look at the coherence principle. What are the elements of the coherence of the coherence principle? Right. You try and exclude distracting material. Stick to simple text and visuals, and everything that you decide to put in a slide, ensure if it's relevant. How do you do that? Whenever you add something, assess again to see whether that further advances the message that you intend to relay, right? And is the message length and language simple enough for your target audience? Right, pretty simple stuff. Signaling principle. Sometimes you can't avoid, but you may have multiple, different modalities of stimuli in your slide. What you need to do is then pay attention or allow the opportunity for your listeners or your audience to exactly know where to pay attention to. In these scenarios, the use of highlights and bold fonts can come in handy, right, in highlighting exactly what are the important points that you intend to convey. Redundancy principle. Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, less is more. So when you're faced with a situation, do you add narration when you're already narrating a concept, all right, or you're trying to put forth some information and you're speaking and elaborating on it verbally, all right? You decide to supplement it with graphics, that's good, all right? But avoid redundant sources of information. That means avoid situations where you add narration, graphics, and text within the same slide, right? So again, this goes back to your coherence principle. Decide exactly what you want to put in the slide, and then let that serve as an adjunct to what you are trying to explain. This goes without saying, spatial continuity principle. Keep the relevant stuff close together, right? So if you have a chart or a figure or a table that you're trying to present, ensure that its descriptors or the title is close to it. Temporal continuity principle, all right? Now, under this principle, basically, when you are trying to explain a complex idea, all right, or a set of events that may be, something that your target audience is not exactly familiar with, right? Try and ensure that the text and description, all right, is presented together rather than consecutively. For instance, if you put up an image, your description of that image or the narration that comes with that image should come together, not one after the other, right? And this is particularly important when you're explaining a process, right? So for that, you need to practice. right? So that your timing of what you say and what you show comes together quite nicely. Segmenting principle. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, you can't escape from being in scenarios where you actually have to present a complex a process or a series of parts of information that actually form the explanation to something that's sometimes quite difficult to understand. What you need to do then is basically deconstruct it into smaller components, right? So for instance, I think you probably are going to have to present, let's say, for instance, a methodology of how your research is going to be carried out. It is tempting to cram them all into one slide and get it done with, but please resist that temptation. Sometimes what you may need to do is to just break them up, to areas that are relevant to one another and present them in a sequence in small installments so that people can follow your presentation well. Pre-training principle, probably not applicable so much in the context of presenting a research proposal, but that is the idea behind our handing out handouts, as well as giving people something to read before the actual presentation itself, so that they get acquainted with what you intend to present. Okay, particularly useful when it's a presentation that's related to teaching, or when you're trying to get a message out to people who are not familiar with what you are intending to present. Modality principle. Okay, visuals and narration always work better than visuals and text. All right, and I think that the diagram that we've put out there is basically sums it all up, right? So limit text usage wherever possible, and when visuals are available, what you need to do then is to keep text to a minimum, which is similar to what the redundancy principle that I mentioned earlier. Multimedia principle, right? Again, text and visuals are always better than text alone. And how do you ensure that you adopt this principle into your presentation? Okay, be very careful with the selection of images and ensure that the images that you put up are relevant and clarify whatever information or basically improves the level of understanding of your targeted audience with regards to what you intend to explain. Personalization principle, all right? Know your audience, communicate your content, and don't merely read chunks of text out. And this is something that we see time and again when we have junior members of a team present something, right? They just put a whole bunch of text out there and they just basically read it out. What happens? You don't establish relatedness with your audience, and very soon you will realize that everyone just basically tunes out. Adopt a slight informal conversational approach rather than an overly formal voice. This helps deliver the message across. Match your tone, pace, and pauses to your content so that people have time to internalize what you're trying to tell them. Okay, and of course, this is something that comes with practice and multiple dry runs. Voice principle, again, with the advent of pre-recorded lectures and pre-recorded instructions that are delivered through to the various platforms available, there is always this tendency, there's always the option now to have a computer voice, right? That's one thing. And the other thing is that this is another form of stimuli for your listeners or your audience, right? They are not just merely going to be dependent on the visuals you put out as well as the text on the screen. They're also going to be listening to you. So be conscious of how fast you speak. Be conscious of when you choose to pause and your voice modulation so that you keep things interesting, all right? And how do you ensure that? One, basic stuff, ensure high quality audio, right? Avoid areas with interference and distracting background noise. And again, practice, practice, practice. Image principle. Again, with all this webinar software and these online platforms, there's always now the option to have a talking head where you want to communicate your image and people get to look at you whilst also looking at the slide, that option is available, but use them sparingly, because the last thing you want is for the talking head image of yours to become a distraction to the information or the message that you're trying to send, right? So my suggestion would be they come in handy when you start to introduce yourself and to introduce the presentation and during your Q&A and feedback sessions, right? But other than that, stick to the slides, choose the material or the visuals or the text that you want to put it in your slides, and let your voice narration do the rest. Okay. So that pretty much concludes a basic introduction to how you go about to deliver an effective presentation. Now we'll be looking at what are the elements you need if you intend to present your research proposal effectively. All right. Know your audience. Your audience are experts in the field, or at least generalists who kind of know, maybe not exactly the topic that you plan to talk about, but research principles and concepts in general. So be prepared, right? Essentially, approach this like a sales pitch, right? You need to be convinced that your project is viable, it's feasible. You need to convince your audience, right, or your evaluators, what the needs of your, what is the need for your study, and whether your study is actually doable. And you need to keep that in mind, right? And if you're wondering about this just before your research proposal presentation, I'm afraid it's already a bit too late. So I think that is pretty much an overlap of what Prof. Vairavan said earlier. These are things you need to consider early on. Okay, provide your evaluators an opportunity to appreciate why your project is important and why is it worth doing. Hence, in your presentation, have a clear overview of your research plan. What is the background? What is the knowledge gap you aim to bridge, and how this project basically, or your research topic basically bridges that knowledge gap, right? And you will soon realize you will soon address this when you start writing out your proposal, okay? Design your intervention and experiment with good controls. Again, I don't wish to overlap with Prof. Vairavan here, but you must be able, so having it all sorted out and well described in a proposal is one thing. Presenting it to your evaluators is another, right? So make sure that that area of your presentation is well developed. Demonstrate how the data that you eventually collect is going to answer these research questions. Anticipate issues that you may face throughout your study and how you plan to overcome them, because if you have not figured it out, you are going to be asked these things during your proposal presentation. So you want to be prepared. What is the mindset you need to have before presenting your research proposal? You are the focus of the presentation. Your slides are adjuncts. Prepare your talk first. Have them organized in your mind before you prepare the slides, right? Your slides are there just to drive points home. They are not teleprompters, and unfortunately, until today, we still see a lot of that happening. It's a whole bunch of text out there. People are just merely reading out of the slides, and you end up not communicating your message well. Use images wherever possible. If you use words, try and abide to the 7x7 rule. This is not a hard rule, right? Okay. Set yourself up for success. Don't fumble with the platform. Whether, look, we have been doing this for some time now. You're either going to be using Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, or on the rare occasion, Cisco WebEx. Know your platforms well. They are freely available. Familiarize yourself with them. You don't want to be fumbling, when in front of a bunch of evaluators who have to evaluate 20, 30 projects at one go, only for them to wait until you sort your tech-related issues out. All right, that really that doesn't bode well, right? For you especially. All right, ensure that it's good. Ensure that you have good internet connectivity. If you know that you have patchy internet connectivity at home or somewhere else, ensure that your presentation is going to be seamless and it's not basically interrupted because of poor connectivity related issues. Anticipate the questions and concerns and be ready to address them. I can't stress this next point more. You need to practice repeatedly so that you get all these elements, all right, aligned together, and so that you increase your chances of your presentation being that much more effective. Now, with all these platforms that I've mentioned earlier, there's basically no excuse. You can always have dry runs with your colleagues, with the rest of your fellow presenters, even before the actual presentation date, so that you can iron out whatever kinks that may reveal themselves. Okay, and this is a thing I rarely see people do. Document and reflect back on the feedback. Your evaluators are there to give you important pointers and to raise important concerns with regards to any limitations your project may have, right? Use that opportunity, use those opportunities to ensure that your project runs with minimal problems throughout the 2-year period that you have to complete it. Okay, and I'll conclude this presentation by kind of introducing a simple checklist on what are the things that you need to prepare. You need to prepare for and ensure that your presentation has, right? First, ask yourself if your entire talk fits together as a coherent whole, is not disjointed, and basically addresses every element that you intend to present. That's the research topic, objectives, research question, methodology. Are they all adequately developed? And are they adequate, all right, to give the evaluators the information they need? Do you have a focused, well-defined hypothesis? Are you clear with your methodology? How is it going to be done? All right, what are you going to do? Is your project feasible? All right, and I think that goes on early in your research planning. All right, all the fluff, all the unnecessary stuff that just basically distracts. Have you gotten them out of your presentation? Have you rehearsed your presentation enough? Next thing is another thing that we see repeatedly. Have you sought your supervisor's feedback? Seeking your supervisor's feedback should not serve as a mere afterthought, right? Get their input. They have probably been evaluators themselves, so they will have very important, valuable input for you to make your research proposal that much more, successful. And have you anticipated the evaluators' concerns, and will you be able to address them? So with all this in place, I wish you guys the very best. Plan, practice, and do your best, and always get your supervisor's feedback before you put your research proposal to be evaluated by the panel of evaluators.